appreciate you who are watching. But they said yes, and you said past time. It's past time to do it.
An income tax.
Sure. Yeah. So we've got a lot of good things discussed today. A great panel. I also wanted to mention that with this particular panel or session is a CLE accredited by the State Bar of Texas. So to receive credit, for those of you who are interested in that, you can sign in at the clipboard located at the back of the room. I also want to let y'all know about our Texas Prosperity Promise the Texas Public Policy Foundation has. It's basically moving into the next legislative session. It's part of our campaign as a foundation to really get grassroots individuals together to focus on core conservative policy measures, which include property tax reform, education reform, government accountability, and a couple of others. You can find that information at texasprosperitypromise.com. And so if you would, please check that out as well. So without further ado, let me introduce each one of our panelists. Really appreciate them all being here today. Senator Craig Estes. He represents the 30th Senatorial District located in North Texas and was first elected to the Texas Senate in a 2001 special election when you were, what, 35?
48.
48, all right. The Texas Senate elected him President Pro Tem, Director during the 83rd interim. Currently serves the chairman of the Natural Resources and Economic Development Committee and as a member of the Senate Committee on State Affairs, Business and Commerce and Nominations, all over the board. Since elected to the Texas Senate, continually works to cut spending, reduce unnecessary government regulation, promote economic freedom, and protect the constitutional rights to bear arms. Please help me welcome him to the stage. Thank you.
Good to see y'all.
Next to him is Representative Jim Murphy. First elected in 2006, serves as chairman of the House Committee on Special Purpose Districts and is a member of the Ways and Means Committee. Also serves as floor leader for the House Republican Caucus. Legislative work is focused on 4 key areas: expanding the economy, improving education, protecting local communities, and strengthening private property rights. Works as an economic development consultant through his firm District Management Services. In this capacity, he has helped bring in over $2 billion in new investment and tens of thousands of jobs to West Houston. Please help me welcome Representative Jim Murphy. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Will Newton, Executive Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, otherwise known as NFIB, since 2005. Prior to joining NFIB, served as Legislative Liaison for Texas Comptroller's Office. Previously was the Director of Governmental and Member Relations for the Texas Restaurant Association. His work experience includes stints in the Texas House of Representatives, working for 3 state representatives and 1 state senator. He's a former member of the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts Property Tax Advisory Council and chairman of the Office of Small Business Assistance Advisory Task Force. Currently serves in the Comptroller's Business Advisory Group. Please help me welcome Will Newton. So what we're going to have today is a conversation, and like I've told each one of the panelists, is that I'd really like for it to be a fluid conversation about the business franchise tax. You know, we've done a lot of work on the business franchise tax at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, looking at the economic effects of it and how
we've gotten it where rather large businesses pay it. Every business has to calculate whether they have to pay it or not. And it's an anchor, it's an absolutely anchor dragging along as our ship of state is sailing. So I'll stop right there.
That's great. Thank you, Senator Estes.
Thank you.
So Representative Murphy, what do you have to say about the franchise tax? I mean, do you think it should be gone, or today, tomorrow, or when?
It's past time,
yeah.
as you mentioned. And I've teamed up with Senator Estes on these bills, and we've worked hard to do a whole lot of tweaks to it and to move the idea forward. I want to start, though, by acknowledging what you guys are doing today. And it may be sort of a given. Oh, TPPF and its supporters want to get rid of a tax. Well, there's reasons for this particular tax needing to be terminated. And it's just, it's cumbersome, it's inefficient, it leads to pyramiding. These are things that tax wonks, like you, Doctor, follow and understand that, look, we understand government needs revenues. Absolutely. We do good things with them and we have critical missions. There are better ways, though, to get them than this particular tax. And by y'all focusing some attention on that today and sort of an ongoing basis, more people start to understand it's not just an anti-tax point of view, it's an anti-this bad tax point of view. No disrespect, Senator, but I'm so delighted to have been elected in 2006 and didn't have to vote to put this tax in place. Because when you're facing a school finance crisis, and Texas was, that would have been a really, really tough vote. And so now we have it, and we've learned more about it over time, about how it doesn't treat people fairly. The idea that you lose money and you still have to pay a tax is just something hard for my constituents to get their minds around. But you know, the theory of the margins tax was a good one. And I'm going to go and say something good about it. In fact, so, you know, Twilight Zone, we've had this panel before. And I've been on it before. And I carried the bills before. What I said 2 years ago was that I came not to praise the margins tax, but to bury it. And we're still on that mission. But the theory of why we have it was actually a good one. I mentioned to Will, you know, the broad-based low rate. Okay, and the other structural element in the Texas tax deal, which is why we're so concerned about property taxes, is capital-intensive businesses, right? The steel, people have lots of steel on the ground or bricks and mortar, pay huge amounts of taxes because of their property taxes, and that goes into the kitty. Well, a service business, relatively, pays very little, and as Texas is moving from sort of an industrial type economy to a more service-based economy, the property tax system really focuses just on one part of it. So there ought to be a way for everybody to be, you know, in the wagon, right? That was a Reagan theory. You want more people pulling the wagon than in the wagon. And so that was the idea. Now, it didn't work out that way. I don't think we ended up where we need to be. But the theory should be everybody should have some responsibility for funding the mission of government. As you and I talked about, we need to keep that spending within line, because that's kind of what drives everything. The challenge for us, though, is if you're going to do without the revenue, do you find new revenue to come in, or are you going to take a haircut for another, you know, $5 billion? And that's what we're going to have to wrestle with as we go through that process. And we are. We're committed to continuing that process. But there is a larger issue at hand, which is making sure our tax system reflects and keeps up with the economy we have in the state of Texas.
That's great. Thank you for those opening remarks.
Now, let me ask you a question. You said you wanted it free and open.
I do.
He talked about how complicated it was. Listen to this. This is an example. Cable television operators pay differently than dish television service providers. Mortgage lenders pay different rates depending on the precise method of which they package their mortgage. And small business in some capital-intensive markets, like car dealers, are taxed at a much higher effective rate than enterprises that rely heavily on human capital, such as law firms. So it's just some examples of what he was saying.
Every session, you know, we'll be in the Ways and Means Committee, and you see the same thing. There's a bill that comes up, and someone says, "Wow, look at the treatment I'm getting," and we all go, "Oh, that's horrible. How can that be?" And the answer is, that's structurally what we've adopted. And when people cry foul, that's when you realize you've got a system that really is not working for everybody.
That's right. It's very complex overall, and I think back in 2006, when this was being discussed, two of the main groups that were against it, both privately and publicly, were TPF and NFIB. And I'd love to hear what you say, Will, by those small businesses and what they say overall about the franchise tax. Because when we look at some of the measures, and on your table there's an op-ed that I wrote recently about economic freedom. And when we look at the Economic Freedom of North America Index put out by the Fraser Institute and some of my good friends at SMU, the O'Neill Center, they find that we rank second best, actually, in the nation. We're tied with Florida as being second highest in economic freedom. But when you look at our tax system, and especially the franchise tax, we score really low. You look at the Tax Foundation Business Tax Climate Index, we rank 13th highest. But you know, the franchise tax, the corporate income tax portion of their index, we rank 49th, second worst. So I'd love to hear about what small business and entrepreneurs really are telling you about the franchise tax.
Well, first, thanks for inviting me to come here and represent the small business community, and thank you, gentlemen, for all your efforts in trying to kill this onerous, horrible, disjointed, discombobulated system of taxation. I believe it was the Council on Taxation that came out with a statement saying it's not so much a gross receipts-based tax as it is more of a tax that evolved from the newly freed Soviet republics. So the state of Texas has taken tax policy lessons from former communists. That's the system we have now is horrible. Now the small business community, my members, 20,000 plus members here in Texas, they'll say in many cases the tax they owe is nothing compared to the cost of compliance, the cost of figuring out the tax, the time, effort, energy, and we called it the 2006 CPA Full Employment Act because nobody could figure it out on their own, and then you had to hire, and even the CPAs are calling us, coming to our meetings, trying to figure out what this tax is all about.
And if you have partners, you have to go through multiple gyrations or you'll get sued.
Yeah, and you have to figure it out 4 different ways. You know, your cost of goods sold, cost of employment, et cetera. So it's just it's the most onerous system of taxation that could have ever developed.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So the way that it's really figured out, it's not based on your profit or anything like that. It's you look at your gross receipts, gross revenue, and you subtract it off in 4 ways, and then you figure out, okay, that's my tax liability. And then if you're a wholesaler or retailer, you get charged one rate, and if you're any other type of company, you pay a different rate. So already you see the complexity with it. Now, 2 sessions ago in 2015, legislature cut it 25%, $2.6 billion in tax cut. It's just huge, and it was a permanent tax cut. Right. The question is, though, so just a full disclosure, we tried to invite some other people who were against eliminating the franchise tax and get some opposition. We couldn't find anyone. So I'm also going to play the role of devil's advocate a little bit here, okay, to have a good discussion going on here. So why haven't y'all done this already? I mean, we're talking about it right now that this is a horrible tax. Why haven't we done it?
Let me comment and say that good public policy sometimes takes several sessions to accomplish. We've seen that in a lot of things. And so no excuses. I think collectively we don't have the political will quite to do it yet, but I think that's changing. And obviously, as you point out, you couldn't find a Republican or a Democrat to come and say, hey, this is a good thing. So that's very telling to me, and we're going to keep hammering away at it.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I think obviously the senator's correct, and we've worked together on this, and that 25% was actually, if you remember our bill, that was what we're going to do the first session, and then we had 3 just like it afterwards. We'd go 25 times 4, and poof, be gone. We only had the political appetite budgetarily to do that first cut. I think the barrier, and I knew we'd get to this. What's wrong with you people? And, that's okay because we're part of the body, and that's what we do. Is getting people comfortable with the absence of that revenue, and that's looking at our budget, and people say we've got a potential shortfall, and might have to dip into rainy day fund right now as it is today. That kind of casts a shadow over that, and so while you have people say, "Oh, I want to get rid of it." And you say, well, will you accept a cut in public ed funding? Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. Well, it's got to come out somewhere.
And let me add that I have served on Senate Finance Committee for many years. It's a tough job balancing the budget of the state of Texas, especially in a downturn. And we have some flexibility, but not much. There's a lot of things that's kind of cut in stone. I guess it's just like life and everything. Timing is everything. So I predict good things in the future. Of course, we don't have a crystal ball and see where we're going. We have a huge amount of money in the Economic Stabilization Fund, but it's a very high bar to access it. We have accessed it at different times.
It's about $11 billion.
Yeah, and so. All the other states combined don't have as much in that fund as we do. But then again, we have seen some economic rainy days, and those of us that are conservative go, let's don't access this fund for everything that comes down the pike,
Well, I'd like to say, you look what's happening now with the federal tax cuts and what's happening. And, my members are reporting they're giving pay increases. I have one member who's building 2 new businesses The stories out there of all the business activity and all the revenue that will come from the business activity because of these tax cuts are going to be enormous, and can largely, pay for themselves. In the same regard, it's the same for NFIB members that have reported to me. They'll give pay raises, they'll invest in their business, invest in inventory, which is property tax, hello. Right. They'll invest in new equipment, in modernizing their businesses, pay off debt. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, activity that can be created. And 5.8 billion, I guess is the number. I promise you that the small business community and the business community can spend that 5.8 billion a lot more efficiently and a lot better to the benefit of the economy than the state of Texas or any government can. Not anything against appropriators. It's just, it's going to be a more efficient way to spend that $5.8 billion.
Yeah, and that brings me to a next point, is that shouldn't businesses, though, pay their fair share? I mean, why is it that we're giving them these tax cuts overall? Well, is the low taxes they're paying on franchise tax already too low? Should we make them pay more?
You are being the devil's advocate.
I'm trying.
Let me say this. First of all, this is as true as can be. Businesses don't pay taxes. Individual people pay taxes. Anybody with a third grade education can figure that one out. And so at the end of the day, it's reflected in less jobs, lower wages, less investment.
Higher prices.
And, I think y'all, and y'all pointed out very well, I think, in your white paper that, hello there, Ginn, great to see you, brother, that there will be a crossing of these lines when it goes down and it's gone, the economy's going to pick up, it will be discernible. And nobody disputes that. The question is, how much? Will it pay for itself? Will it pay for itself 10 times over? Will it cost us? For a few years, it'll cost you. But I think, no one really knows, but we can surmise that over a period of years, it's going to be positive, not negative.
Well, and that's what the Beacon Hill study, remember a couple of years ago, we did that through the TCCRI, I believe, did that Beacon Hill study. And that showed very clearly there were going to be offsetting gains, particularly in sales tax and somewhat in property tax, as these businesses would do the things you're talking about, Will. Right. And they quantified it, and people said, oh, that's a bunch of baloney. Except when we cut it 25% the next session, you could look at the comptroller's report and see the uptick in revenue, and you go, well, what about that? Now, this is not science, so you can't isolate that one factor as a variable out of the whole economy. Sure. But it certainly seems that very much did cause a stimulus in other revenue sources for government that people paid more willingly, I should say. Yeah.
I think the way to do it is not just axe it right now, but a slow buy down, like the start that y'all had two sessions ago with a 25% cut. And then maybe put a mechanism in place that says, okay, when the revenues are there, it's automatic. Let's just start buying down.
That was the proposal we had. I know.
Right.
So there was different proposals, one on the House, one on the Senate, that both sort of achieved that.
If the comptroller can certify there's 5%,
well,
cut it 5%. Just start
I get that, but I'm still going to file my bill to act.
Please do. Thank you.
Please do. And I'll file the companion again.
You bet.
But no, I think if business, knew that this tax was going away, that's half the battle. Yeah. You say, okay, you just got to endure it for a certain period of time or certain condition, because it's a drag in the economy and it's a drag on our competitiveness. Yes. I mean, companies they can kind of go wherever they want these days. It has nothing to do with incentives. It talks more about how easy it is to work in the global economy.
Yeah.
Let me make one more point. And I'll give you a story of an old prize fighter that he retired after 80 bouts and he was undefeated. And they asked him about his amazing career. And they asked him, how did you go undefeated those 80 bouts? He said, I picked my fights very carefully. Now think about that. There are other things we'd like to do. Everybody would love to significantly lower property taxes. I was here when we lowered it from $1.50 to $1.
Yep.
We worked on this end of the equation, but not on the other end. But The secret, I think, to success in good public policy is to do what's doable. This particular issue is doable.
Yeah, that's good. So one of the things that I'm looking at in this new center here at the Foundation, Center for Economic Prosperity, that I'm the director of, is finding government barriers to competition that keep us from being more prosperous. One of the big ones is the franchise tax.
Number one.
You know, and so this is one of the ones that I'm trying to act as quickly as possible. But what we hear from those that are against it, even though they wouldn't come today, is that, look, you're taking money away from education. Because when they made the change in 2006, any increase in revenue above that level goes to education, goes to school finance. And so if we reduce the franchise tax, are we cutting money to education?
On a temporary basis, yeah, if you did nothing else, that would occur. But I don't think that's the commitment of the legislature to public education is to simply make it take the hit for this revenue. I don't believe that, and I think that would turn out very differently. It is a concern, sure, we'd have to address that. But you know, in the grand scheme of things, $5 billion is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that's less than I'm getting for this presentation today. But
Oh, you're getting paid for this?
out of $200 billion, right?
Yeah.
Surely you can make that work.
Well, at what point does this tax become just a nuisance tax? A nuisance on the people that have to pay it, nuisance on the comptroller who has to, you know, enforce it and collect it. It can be just over time, just slowly drift away, and just as we buy it down over
Yeah,
time.
Vince, one of the problems we had with the 25% cut was a lot of people want us to raise the floor more.
That was another question I had, yes.
And so the countervailing point of view
So
is
just real quick, right now it's $1 million exemption floor to try to exempt small businesses from paying the franchise tax.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What percentage of business in Texas then is under that floor?
I don't have that answer. Will, do you know?
It's an astounding number.
It is.
It's
We had that
80%
data-
of all
We had that
businesses.
data when we
Yeah,
did the
it's-
cut.
Yeah.
But the problem is if everybody's not feeling the pain,
Yeah.
you have fewer people saying, get rid of this tax.
I seem
And
to
so the
remember 80%.
25%, yeah, the 25% was our way of saying, we'll cut the revenue and give everybody relief.
But those people under 4 million sure would appreciate it if you would consider it.
Of course, yeah,
Yes,
sure.
yeah.
But then you're only left with fewer people paying, and then we don't care so much because it's only this many companies.
I believe by
We should
raising
care.
that up to 4 million only cost about $380 million. So it wasn't a big charge on the to the state budget at all.
I want lots of people
You want
joining
them
the
complaining,
fight to
and we'll
end
keep
this
complaining too.
I mean, the principles of sound taxation, right? You want something that's broad,
Yep.
you want something that's flat, and you want it simple. This one's pretty broad, although with the exemption, a lot of them are cut out.
We made it less so.
Look at the next one. It's flat. Well, you have two rates. So it's
And
somewhat
one-
flat depending on what type of business you
And
are.
one's double the other. I mean,
one's
it's not-
double the other. That's
and
true,
It's not just
too.
like a little bit different. It's-
Yeah, and simple, no
not.
way that it's simple. And it's very complex overall tax. So it fails all of these. And another way that the franchise tax was supposed to be put in place was to lower property taxes over time. And have property taxes been lowered?
Not even close.
Not even close. And so that's another question I have. What are we at now? Is it franchise tax elimination or property tax reduction? If you had to choose between those two, which one would you choose?
Man.
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
Both those taxes hit you even when you're not making a profit. So, you know, that's the hell of the margins taxes. You know, a story of a member of mine in Dallas. In 2009, his business had lost $500,000. He had gone to his parents for loans to help him keep the business afloat. He lost his line of credit. The economy was gone. He had to lay off 5 of his 27 employees, just barely hanging on. And then he said, yeah, I had to drive down to Austin to deliver a $14,000 check. Because it gets you even when you're losing money.
That's
and
right.
that's the biggest sin of it all. Because he doesn't have a rainy day fund.
Yeah.
I know someone that does, state of Texas. They can always dip into that if there's an economic downturn. And that's what it's for. That's why it was created back in '87 or whenever that was. So just remember, small business owners don't have a rainy day fund. And you know, there's a lot of people that rely on the small businesses. And 4 million employees work for small firms in the state of Texas. And they rely on those jobs. They need those jobs. And you know, when they start drying up because of an economic downturn, and then we are forced into a tax liability situation, it's horrible for the small business community.
Yeah.
Let me add that no issue is in a vacuum. And, should you do this or should you do that? Those are very difficult questions. We will continue as a legislature to work on, as you know, during our special session, we had a vigorous debate, House and Senate, of how to, not to lower property taxes, but to slow the growth in property taxes. Right. And we ended up, y'all quit a day early, as you remember.
We were tired.
But, we were juggling that around, and that issue will continue to be there. And so it's not like your question either or. I do still believe that this is eminently doable, this issue, but that doesn't mean we're going to quit working on property taxes. Yeah. Not at all.
So maybe it should be, do you want franchise tax cuts, elimination, or property tax reduction? And the answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, the average person is going to want to see more money in their pocket. You get there by lowering the property taxes. But to take the big view of more jobs, more investment, the best thing for the economy is for people to have jobs. Mm-hmm. That's easy. So it's not either or, it's both.
It's not either or, it's definitely both. And I would say the scale, right, of the margins tax makes it easier to eliminate just because it doesn't affect as many people, but in terms of economic impact, huge. Yeah. But we're going to see property tax reform. We didn't get there this past time, but it's coming. I mean, it affects so many people, and it affects whether you live in a home or an apartment or you're a business. I mean, everybody's in that noose, and no one's seeing any real relief.
Yeah, and y'all have hit on this, but the key driver to these taxes is spending, right?
Yes, sir.
Spending comes first, and then we decide how we're going to tax people in the economy in order to pay for that spending. So if we keep our eye just on taxes, we may be missing the mark some. How can we further limit the growth in spending? The last two sessions, the legislature's done a good job. They've kept this increase in spending by less than population growth plus inflation, which we've called the Texas Public Policy Foundation a conservative budget. And we give y'all props on that. It's great. But at some point, how can we continue to keep that slower and maybe even cut it over time? Because I think if I asked us and many people in here, are we at the right level of government spending or do we need to be lower? I think a lot of us would say lower. But the problem is politically that's very difficult to cut. So what we've resorted to then is slowing the growth rate over time. So how can we do that even more?
I got a great idea.
Yeah.
For many years during sessions, I have filed a resolution to Congress telling them to pay us back for the money we have spent securing the border with Mexico, which is our international border.
That would help.
Lo and behold, the Trump administration it's a trickle, but has started to reimburse us some for the Texas Guard being on the border.
Nice.
We're talking about $800 million to $1 billion that we as Texas taxpayers spend to try to secure that border. So hats off to the Trump administration, and we can use that $1 billion for so many more things, for roads, for schools.
Cutting taxes?
Cutting taxes, yeah. If you think about it, you get hot under the collar about it. Yeah. Because the federal government, up until recently, has objectively failed to secure our border.
So just trying to think through the notion of where do you find that relief?
Yeah.
Our budget is not done as you would do in a business. When we start out, we get a BRE, biannual revenue estimate. And the comptroller tells us, y'all get about this amount of dollars. And immediately, it's envisioned and started to be appropriated. So when you march along some months later and you've got your margins tax elimination bill, your property tax relief bill, they go, oh, no, we've already spent that money. In fact, when you file your bill, you get a fiscal note that says, whew, Jim, you're costing the state $6 billion. Yeah. I'm like, I'm not costing the state a penny.
Yeah.
I'm saving my constituents money. It's their money we're saving, not the state. But we start out with the revenue first, and then we move into this appropriation. So it requires leadership and of all our folks to fund tax cuts as an expense, as a set aside, as an, I won't use that word earmark, but that is the idea, is that you've got to set aside that money before you start appropriating, because once you start appropriating, every dollar has a huge fan in whoever's going to be getting it. And so that's how we were able to do the 25% a couple years ago, is leadership said, okay, we'll live without that money.
So you're saying that government money doesn't grow on trees? I mean, where the money has to come from somewhere.
Well, and another big deal is we don't have a printing press. That's a big problem with the federal government.
Well, thank
They just
God we
print
don't,
more.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Temptation.
I was going to say, you grow the economy, you grow the pie, and it'll necessarily increase revenues to the state. But think of the message it sends. The state legislature, when they passed House Bill 32, said it's our intent, 2 sessions ago, it's our intent this tax does not serve this purpose and it needs to go away. But think of the message when the legislature puts in place a mechanism that buys down the tax over time, the message it sends to the rest of the United States or globally. We value business. We want you to come here. We want you to start a business, and we're not going to penalize you for starting that business. Excuse me. It sends a powerful message.
It does.
Globally, intergalactically, that we value the business and we want you here.
Yeah, I've been writing a lot on how DC and other states need to follow the Texas model, use our playbook. It's been successful. But here recently, they've kind of flipped the script on us a little bit, because now they being DC, Congress just cut the corporate income tax from 35%, the highest in the developed world, to 21%, which is below the worldwide average of 22.5%. So they cut it, pretty substantially. And now we weren't able to cut the franchise tax this last time. And so when I get calls from some of our other organizations across the U.S., they're like, hey, what did Texas do last session on cutting the tax? And I wonder if it's going to be more difficult to cut a tax next time after you kept the ball from rolling, right? We cut it 25%, then nothing was done. And this next session, some are saying we might have an $8 billion hole that we're coming into, although a lot of that's revenue, that's not the expenditures. And I think we've really got to look at spending, whether it's zero-based budgeting, program-based budgeting. I mean, really look in there and see what are areas we can cut. Because as you mentioned, we get on this budget as, okay, here's the level, $217 billion, and then there's an inertia. Let's just start there and move forward.
Right.
But let's really talk about what's in that $217 billion and how much of that budget we really need that's not going to administration. I mean, for example, in public education, it's around half of it actually goes to the classroom compared to other areas. How can we really look at these overall? Medicaid needs reform. And with the Trump administration there, maybe we can get a federal block grant. That would help to slow down growth, because the major increase in budget over time is through Medicaid and healthcare, as y'all know.
Well, it's surpassed education for the first time ever.
Yeah.
And it's growing faster.
Yep.
So, pretty big trend.
So those are key areas that we've got to find a way to control over time, or it's going to be more and more difficult for us to argue that we need to eliminate the franchise tax.
I think it'd be better for the legislature to not think of this as lost revenue, tax cut, whatever. They should think of it as an investment of the future and growing the economy and creating jobs, creating businesses. It's more of an investment than it is a loss in revenue and a loss to the state.
That's good.
What other things y'all have to say? Because we're about to turn to Q&A. And so
somebody
final
is
remarks, I
drilling
suppose.
on something back there.
They are.
Yeah.
Speaking of drilling,
We like drilling.
We've seen the revenue picture from the comptroller. You've all been watching these month after month. We've been in double-digit growth in revenue moving into the next session, 2019. That'll be interesting to see what the revenue looks like at that time. When I start seeing these high increases in revenue growth, I'm saying, well, why don't we cut more? Maybe it's growing too fast, but that could help the picture to do something like this. Buy down property tax revenue over time. And just to put something in y'all's head, I mean, what if we were able to use, and there were some bills like this last session, if we had surplus revenue, why not use that to buy down permanently, replace property taxes on the school M&O portion? Or use it to buy down and eliminate the franchise tax? I mean, would that sound good, or, I mean?
That's what's wonderful about this job. There are so many really good ideas. Got to be honest with you, there's a lot of bad ideas that come too. But
We killed those in committee.
that's all about the process. Different groups publish white papers, and what about this, what about that? You know, I'd say everything's on the table.
Okay.
And it's amazing how things get momentum and happen, and sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it happens over many years, but that's governing, and that's trying to craft good public policy, just like my colleague Senator Buckingham back there likes to do.
Yeah, I think the senator said something very wise, which is you've got to look at all the ideas and see which ones move forward, and they're all good, so you can't choose one to the exclusion of the others, but we're going to see which ones we can get done.
Yeah.
And if that takes another session to come back and do something later on, then we'll take those gains. We've made some progress, and it's been pretty terrific, but we don't want to stagnate and rest on our laurels what we did in 2015.
No, there are a lot of good ideas out there in the legislative arena. I just want to make sure we understand the small business ideas are paramount.
Yeah.
And I think y'all more than others. You know, like I was telling Representative Murphy and Senator Estes as well, 100% voters lifetime with NFIB, but actually they get extra credit because we can add another 5 or 10% if we're carrying franchise tax bills or bills that are specific to small business needs and wants. So
Let me put in a plug for NFIB. I was a member for many, many years as I owned and ran my family business. And y'all do a great job of, we kind of graduated from a small business to kind of a medium and kind of a large business, but what a great job y'all do informing your members. And I would just put in a plug for you. If anybody is a small business or medium-sized business and is not a member of NFIB, you are missing the boat.
Yeah.
thank you, sir.
Well
Appreciate
said.
that.
Yeah.
On that, I want to turn over some Q&A right on here. Over.
Thanks, Vance. This is a question actually for all four of you. As you mentioned, Vance, you have to fund schools, you got to fund Medicaid, there's 200 billion things you got to fund. What's the right way to fund it? If it's not a franchise tax, is it another corporate income tax? Is it a personal income tax? Is it a sales tax? Is it a property tax? If you had to write the tax code from scratch for Texas, what is the right way for Texas to collect revenue?
It's a great question. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I like the idea of the consumption taxes. The sales tax, is our number one revenue for the state. And so I think that has great potential. We have a lot of things exempted from sales tax. Mm-hmm. In fact, there are about as many items exempted as there are taxed. So, people talk about, you have to raise the sales tax to 14% to achieve this. It's like, well, what if you start taxing the things that aren't taxed? I'll just say it right now. Food. Oh my God, who would do that? Well, it'd be a giant revenue source, and everyone pays it. It tracks with the economy, and it tracks with inflation. So I think consumption taxes are really the best answer if you say we've got to wean ourselves from that. I don't think we'll have the appetite, I'll defer to my colleague, for some sort of a new business income tax. I think that has like zero chance, but
What about an income tax?
less than zero.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Over my cold dead body. Quote Phil Graham.
Yeah.
The consumption tax, it's interesting. We calculated that it'd be, to totally eliminate the property tax, the consumption tax would have to be about 18 to 19%. I've actually been in a country where it had, I think it was 22%, Italy. And of course, if you're over there as a tourist, you pay this 22% tax on things you buy, but you can go to the tax office and get a tax refund, but they make it so complicated to do it, nobody does it. I would say that there are negative and positives of everything you do, and there could be some very negative consequences to an 18% sales tax in Texas. And being from Wichita Falls, one of them would be Oklahoma, where everybody would go to get everything they need.
And of course, that's if you kept the same sales tax base we had today. If you expanded the base, then you could get it down.
That's true.
We had a study that was done by Art Laffer back in 2012 that said if you eliminated property taxes, we could get it 11%. If you had taxed the transfer of property along with services that are taxed in one other state. Over to your key point, if I was devising an overall tax system, it would be strictly based on consumption taxes. To me, it's the most efficient. It allows for people to have a choice. If you have a property tax, that seemed like a good idea back in the day when there wasn't the technology that we have today, because your property was tied to your value and your worth. right? And so it's easier to collect those taxes. Today, there are computers that you can push in a couple buttons and get the sales tax that you're going to pay, and people now have a choice. And also, from my viewpoint as an economist, is capital accumulation. This goes back to Adam Smith. Capital accumulation is what brings about more wealth. So why are we taxing property, which is a capital, right? And therefore having less economic growth over time. But I also would say that we'd have a much smaller size of government if it was in my view, to where it's only preserving liberty. We've went out way far from all of that, and so therefore the sales tax wouldn't need to be 11%. It would be much lower than that because you would be funding a much smaller base of spending.
Interesting.
So anyway, other questions? Yes, sir. Joe.
Hi. You mentioned the job creation that would occur, or the additional jobs we would get if we eliminated the franchise tax. So it's would be an economic development tool. I was wondering, looking for revenue, as you were mentioning, do y'all have any idea how much we are losing or in tax abatements trying to attract business? And wouldn't a uniform no franchise tax be a greater business magnet than all these little tax abatements all the cities and counties and school districts?
How do we get a better economic environment? Or do we want to use these teasers, kind of bring people in, sweeteners? What do y'all think?
You know, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as for the small business community, my members don't work for tax abatements. They don't look for investments.
They'll never get it.
Yeah, they don't.
It's the bigger businesses, right?
Their desire is that they have a dream. They want to create a business. They want to own, operate, and grow a business. So they're not looking for any kind of government largesse to lure them in or have them incentivize them in any way. So that would be for the larger, the Fortune 500.
So for them, they would like to see the franchise tax gone away.
Yeah.
Because that's going to lower their cost, and then they can do what they do best, which is invest and hire workers.
And that's it. Cost of compliance, in many cases, is much more than the actual tax they have to remit to the controller.
Now,
Estes, you got something boiling up here.
Excuse me. It was interesting. This was a few years ago, but I talked to a person here in Austin that represents really, really large businesses. And I said, I thought, I'm going to really have a lot of support here for eliminating the franchise tax. And this person that represented some of the biggest said, no, we don't want to do that. And I said, well, why not? He said, because we're afraid of what might come after that. So it's kind of like it's the devil they know instead of the devil that they don't know.
Yeah.
But realize my chairmanship is natural resources and economic development. And I get the theory of doing away with all economic development incentives. It's a good, but the other 49 states would love for Texas to do that. If all 50 states would unilaterally disarm, it'd be great. But it is, you're either in the game or you're not in that. And yes, I think that having no franchise tax would be one mark in your column, but I don't know whether it would sway the day on everything because they look at a ton of different factors. I mean, I mentioned the Amazon second headquarters. I mean, their list is a mile long of all the things that they are evaluating. So I get the theory, but also realize that 49 other states are after these corporate relocations just like we are.
Yeah, I think the senator makes an excellent point. Eliminating the franchise tax helps everybody, and that would be a plus. But as the saying goes, right, don't bring a knife to a gunfight. If the other states are able to put together, and we're talking about for an Amazon type deal, or the next Toyota plant or something like that, Texas needs to compete. We don't need to outdo the other states because we have so many good things going. But if you show up empty-handed, you're going to be shown the door, and these businesses, the right ones with the right incentives, do produce follow-on capital, additional industries. So you've got to be strategic about how you do them. But to throw them out would be a real problem for Texas.
Well, and many of those in the small business community also service those larger firms. You know,
Exactly.
they help build the facilities. They're your dry cleaner when you're bringing in 50,000 new jobs. They're the restaurants, everything that's involved in that
You know,
part.
some of the reforms we made a couple of years ago, particularly on the 313 side, said they had to show a greater economic impact than the cost of the abatement. So that was a good reform to say, okay, is Texas getting its money's worth out of this?
Yeah,
That's the key
That's
question.
important.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess one thing to consider too is when we have these tax abatements, or if we're using the Economic Stabilization Fund, or whatever else it may be, those are dollars that are coming from taxpayers though, right?
Absolutely.
So I mean, it is contributing to a higher tax burden than otherwise, meaning that it's reducing our economic competitiveness some. So there's reasons to get rid of them, but I hear what you're saying as well. You got to like weigh the cost and
Well, but if
benefits
they
overall.
produce more jobs, more revenue,
Yeah.
aren't you also buying that with that money?
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'd rather see us not have any of them overall. You know what I mean?
But we don't live in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Vance. I mean, you
I
know.
hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
You know, you mentioned Dr. Laffer.
Yes.
And famously, he put his Laffer curve, sketched it out on the back of a napkin.
He did.
And I actually have a friend in California that was one of his former business partners. But that has stood the test of time. And I don't understand why Democrats, especially in Washington, don't see, and that's you know, it's fun to watch Ken Hansen and Phil Graham reminisce, tell old war stories. But it has been proven time and time again, and I predict it will be proven again what the Trump administration has done with the tax cuts. That yes, rising tides do lift all boats. Yeah.
It's good. Next question.
I know that you did address this earlier. I'm sorry you weren't here, but I want the people from the legislature to understand that the gross receipts tax does create real problems for small business. I'll give you just a quick scenario. You got a business grossing about $2.5 million a year, operating in an actual net cash loss. Not depreciation, not Section 179, none of that. A real cash loss, albeit small. But you're still going to owe a lot of money to the state of Texas after you deduct the $1 million that you give us in the deduction. And when you're reaching in your pocket as an entrepreneur or an investor to cover that while you're trying to turn a small business around, and then you put the property tax on top of it, it's painful. It's very real, and it does hurt. And it kind of sours your feelings a little bit towards the franchise tax. Not whining about having to pay taxes. I know you need money, but at least let us take payroll off of it. If I could take payroll off of it, or at least in this particular year, it would have solved that problem. But that first year we had to write that check, I had to dip into my retirement account to cover it. Now business is doing fine. Now it's turned around and the number of employees have doubled and everybody's happy. But I look at it again this year and I say, well, maybe it's time to file a Schedule C, a proprietorship, and not have to pay it at all.
Yeah.
Now, how crazy is that? Because you only do it to C Corps, LLCs, LPs, and so on. How crazy is that? To run it as a county registered partnership or sole proprietorship and not be liable for it at all. You know, the biggest hoop I have to jump to do that is getting my TABC license put in my name and out of the LLC.
Yeah, it's a great question. We talked some about that earlier on the cost of compliance. I guess you hear that a lot. Well,
all the time. It's a major gripe. And that's why it's so universally despised, this tax, because it's a pain in the butt to have to figure it out. And it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time and record keeping, and that's why they just want that to go away. That's time spent, they could be spending, generating new business, or helping their clients, or serving the community. It's a big time suck for the small business community.
any other comments there?
No, thank you for telling us.
Yeah.
I mean, we know that issue, and it's unfortunate. We've talked about things like carrying losses forward, which would make sense, but would make it an income tax. So that's why you got to get rid of it, because we can't mechanically fix that problem, I don't think.
Let me add one thing to the discussion. Everyone said, I lose money, but I still have to pay the tax. We have an amendment in the Constitution that was put in by a gentleman that I think dearly loved Texas, Bob Bullock. We might want to talk about that. And it basically says, done way before my time, that there can be no tax that is calculated on income. Is that pretty close to what it says? So to have any tax that had, to solve that problem, I don't know of any way around that Bullock amendment in the Texas Constitution. Bob Bullock, from what I understand, tried to institute a state income tax, was thwarted in that effort, and therefore had that put in the Constitution. Of course, it was ratified by the voters. And I think his thinking wasn't there at the time, but I've heard this, that if I can't do it, no one else is ever going to do it. I may not be totally accurate in all of that because I'm talking about from people that were there that knew Bob Bullock. But
And amen that we don't have an income tax.
Yeah,
We're one of only 9 states to not have an income tax. And I think to your point too is that businesses don't pay taxes. You made this point earlier, but I think it's worth repeating is businesses don't pay taxes. They submit taxes to the government, but the ones who pay them are people, whether it's their employees who pay lower wages or are paid lower wages or lower benefits, or consumers who pay higher prices, or those who are looking for jobs because there's fewer jobs available. That's how these business taxes really pay. I mean, the corporate income tax cut at the federal level was great, 35% down to 20%, 21%. But I think the question should be like, why should we have a corporate income tax at all? When those taxes are just going to be passed along to the consumer in a slower economy overall. And it seems like we've fallen into a trap of saying, well, look, they've got to pay their fair share, which is the question that I asked earlier, right? They've got to pay their fair share, and higher income people need to pay their fair share. But even if you look at the individual income tax at the federal level, the top 1% pay 40% of the taxes, the top 10% pay 70% of the tax, the top, 60% pay basically 100% of all taxes. Even if you made a flat tax at the federal income tax, right, it would still be progressive in that nature because higher income people would pay more in taxes, just like consumption tax.
That's exactly right. I was going to say that because businesses consume.
Yeah.
And when you consume more, you pay more. That's the beauty of that.
So
tax.
yeah, sales tax in Texas, 55% of the sales tax is paid by businesses.
Right.
We think of it as all individuals, but businesses pay a lot, the majority of our sales tax collections. What other questions? Yes, sir. Wait for the mic real quick, sir. Thank you.
Okay. I can take in all this, but there are worse things. If you live in certain counties like I do, small business, Harris County, you pay county taxes on top of these. Furniture and fixtures, equipment, vehicles. I can pay for a bulldozer, but I also have to pay a higher tax if I buy a new bulldozer. I can replace a computer. Furniture and fixture goes up. Now that irks me worse than a lot of these other things.
Well, I mean, there are some jurisdictions, Harris County is one of them, where personal property almost equals their real property on the tax rolls. So it's a big deal. And we've had conversations about the inventory tax.
Yeah. Devin, you had a bill on that?
We did.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty big number. And the problem is, this is kind of way in the weeds, but just so y'all know, it's where I live sometimes.
That's where the fun is.
Yeah, but so you could say, well, let's eliminate the inventory tax, which is, would be a good thing, except it's extremely disparate in its effect. So you have some areas that have virtually no inventory to be affected. And they have some areas where it would be a tremendous cost. And we hear from them when these bills are proposed, strangely, yeah.
Yeah, I bet.
Senate Finance on February 20th is going to be taking up that very issue and talking about inventory and,
excellent.
and business personal property tax. And, I don't know, how many states do it, but it's a little strange, I know this is off topic, but that we are, in the state of Texas, we have a tax on items held for resale. So that means you're getting all that.
You're paying twice.
You're paying twice. You're getting all that lumber or all that material off your lot, January 1st, so you don't have to render to the local appraisal authority. So yeah, that's another big issue for the small business community as well.
And it penalizes the ones, I'm sorry, Craig.
That's all right.
It penalizes the ones that are honest enough to render.
Yeah.
The guy doesn't render, by the time they find out, the inventory's gone.
Which reminds me of something I was going to say earlier. Everybody thinks that personal income tax is the worst tax, and it's pretty bad. But I think the absolute worst tax ever devised is called value-added tax. As goods move through the process, it's taxed here, taxed here, taxed here. That was kind of what you're alluding to. You're the economist. Value-added tax, we want to stay away from that.
Yes.
Every place that's done that, it's been a disaster.
Yeah, it's not a good tax at all.
Yep.
What else? Right over here.
Representative
Ginn, Mr. Seaman. Mike's coming around to you.
I'll give a quick shout out to Doc Anderson.
For my esteemed experts up there, Craig, is an opinion. Isn't the consumption tax the most fair tax of all? Because I can elect whether I'm going to buy a Huber or a Ferrari, or I'm going to buy steak, or I'm going to buy hamburger. And now with the new 24,000 head of household under the current Trump tax bill, most of the people won't be paying taxes anymore. Question, isn't consumption tax the only fair tax?
Yeah,
I think so, but
we
I'll just
covered
do
that
this.
some, Gene, but
Yeah.
good point.
Yes.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm serious.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised if you eliminated the property tax entirely and gave the people of Texas the opportunity to vote on TPPF's 11% broad-based state sales tax, it would pass. I've seen the surveys and the research on it.
And that's one of the things we have in our Texas Prosperity Promise that I talked about earlier. The number one thing is eliminating property taxes.
That's the key.
And there are a lot of ways to do that, and we're going to be talking about that during the interim. Some have been raising the sales tax, broadening the base. We've also been toying with the idea of using surplus dollars, put in a more strict spending limit. 4% of population growth plus inflation. Why not restrict spending? And any additional amount of revenue goes towards buying down the property tax permanently. And we've done some initial research that shows maybe over 10 to 12 years, you could actually buy down all M&O property tax for schools over the course of 10 to 12 years. And that's half of the overall property tax burden. So there's a lot of ideas that I think are going directly at that. So while we can eliminate the franchise tax, how can we get rid of the property taxes at some point as well? A lot of people would say, well, it's local, right? It's a local property tax, and those local property taxes are funding education. But if you really look at our school finance system, which I've done quite a bit of research on, it's really a state-administered funded program. Because the funding formulas are what determine how much those dollars go back out to the school districts, right? Now the local city, counties, and special purpose districts, a lot of that stays there at the local level, so that's a little bit more difficult to decide how you distribute those funds out if you eliminate all property taxes. But I think there are ways to do that because so many people are upset about property taxes being higher. I mean, the governor has this new idea of the automatic rollback of 2.5%, which is lower than the 4% last time, which I think could be difficult this next session, but it's something to keep the conversation going.
I think the governor's to be commended for a bold idea, and we're studying it both in the House and the Senate, and I think it has promise.
Well, getting rid of that M&O tax, would really help us because the districts I represent are in recapture, and so they're not really happy about the property taxes they pay. They don't even get to keep them.
That's right. And so I guess we only have a minute left. Do you have any quick comments as we end? This has really been a great discussion.
Been most enjoyable. Thank you for the very good questions also.
Keep up the fight.
We appreciate what TPPF does for for us.
Thank y'all what y'all do each and every day. And thank y'all for being here.
Great.